Welcome to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education AI Literacy webinar series. In this video, we are exploring session 4, Guiding and Judging AI. My name is Greg Kulowiec. I'm the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education AI Strategy Consultant, and I'm excited to explore this content with you in part 4 in this webinar series. Before we get started, we just want to make sure that we clearly articulate that this webinar series aligns with DESE's educational vision, which states that all students are known and valued, learning experiences are relevant, real-world, and interactive, and individualized supports enable students to excel at grade level and beyond. Now, the content we're exploring today and part 4 of this series is derived from the AI literacy module that is available on the department's EdTech AI page. Now, there's 2 versions of this module. We have the version that's openly accessible. You can click through and navigate in any way that you like. That's the one on the left. And then the one on the right with the gold seal is one that you work through step by step to get a certificate of completion when you're done. Now, this course is basically exploring, or this webinar series is basically exploring all 5 parts of this AI literacy module, but we're doing it in video form. So I'm happy that you're joining me for part 4 in the series, which is exploring the 3rd principle, which is guiding and judging AI. Now, all 5 principles, I like to think of them as like ways of thinking or skills and dispositions, because it's how we're approaching the technology. So in part 1 of the webinar series, we did a big overview of the department's AI guidance and AI literacy, kind of big picture concepts. Then we got into grasping the fundamentals in part 2. That's really understanding data sets, the tendency and the behavior of the technology. In part 3, the previous video, we explored the disposition of centering human intelligence. So making sure all of our actions are kind of in that human-centered framework of human, machine, human. And now in part 4 of the webinar series, we're going to look at this 3rd skill or disposition and core principle of guiding and judging AI. So this has to do with skillfully crafting our prompts and our inputs, and then really thinking about evaluating the output that's generated. In the next 2 webinar series, in this next 2 videos in the webinar series, we're going to explore prioritizing people, which really focuses on student data privacy and making sure we're really thinking about the end users. And then the last part is going to be exploring impacts beyond just touching our keyboard, but bigger ideas around environmental impact and academic integrity and those sorts of concerns. So with that, let's really think about how we might be able to manipulate these tools effectively. So most of the time when we're using generative models, we can enter something short and sweet into an AI model and we'll get a result that is okay, good, maybe not great, and kind of generic. So think of AI as having a quote default mode. And then this default mode, it's likely to produce results that may be sounding bland or generic, reflect the biases present in its training data, or not quite be what we need in terms of really being helpful. So what we have to know how to do is have kind of approaches or strategies we can use to move beyond generic output, move beyond kind of unclear and imprecise expectations of these language models. So let's look at this. Let's look at this first by examining this prompt and how we might keep adding layers to the prompt to get what we want out of it. So if we were to prompt a language model, write a poem about a strawberry, we get this generic output. It has this sweet crimson heart. It's jeweled with tiny seeds. It's summer's first blush. It's like a whispered promise, and it's sunshine that's captured. Reasonable poem, maybe not exactly what we're looking for, but the output is generated based on this kind of incomplete, imprecise, and not really specific prompt. Let's add a layer, write a short rhyming poem about a strawberry. It has an emerald crown, it's renown, it's summer's birth, its tiny seeds upon its girth, it's bright and fair beyond compare. So now we're adding this expectation and getting a more precise output. Now you might be thinking, like, I don't need generative output about strawberry poems. Whatever it is you're kind of doing with the model, whatever problem you're trying to solve, and we think about how can I add layers of precision? How can I add increased expectation? How can I add clarity into what I'm asking these tools to generate so I can get a more helpful, more kind of productive output? Let's add one more layer. Write a short rhyming poem about a strawberry that a kindergartner would love. Little strawberry, red and sweet, you're my favorite summer treat. Tiny seeds that dot your skin, hide the juicy part within. In my bowl or on my cake, you're the best snack I can take. So clearly, the language here is shifting towards lower elementary learners. The rhyme scheme is really fun and upbeat. It's this really optimistic poem with language that's accessible to younger learners. So we're adding these layers of kind of specificity throughout the prompting strategy here to get the output that's going to be beneficial to us. Now, this example, this kind of like poem output example, is the starting off point to think about what approaches might we take to create really precise outputs to get exactly what we need. Now, before we get into this prompting strategy, I like to think of like really straightforward language we can use with students, that we can use with educators, of what is the thinking or the framework of their thinking. We need to be wildly clear. We need to be curious about what these tools can generate, and we need to be creative in terms of asking for the output. So oftentimes, if we think about the entry point of use cases, we'll often think about the work we're already doing and try to mimic that work or duplicate that work for the purpose of efficiency or productivity. So, educators might think about the tools in terms of, can I create another worksheet? Can I create more problems? Can I create another quiz? Like, yes, that's possible. But if we think with a level of curiosity, like, what problem can I solve that I might not be able to solve otherwise? Or what creative student experience can I build in my classroom now that I might not be able to build if I didn't have this model as a thought partner to work with along the way? And can I be really clear with my expectations and what I'm asking it to build for me? One really helpful analogy that I've come across over the past few years and kind of exploring this concept with educators is one of thinking like the generative AI as a genius that's locked behind a door, right? Obviously, we're not talking about a human genius, this generative model. The model is locked behind a door, the genius is locked behind the door. The only way that we can interact with that genius is to write our ideas down on a piece of paper, slide those ideas under the door, wait for the genius to decode just the words that we've provided, and then generate an answer, response, or an output back. If we think about it in this way, if we're clear, we're curious, we're precise, we're creative, we have high levels of expectations, we're like really detailed in our interaction, then we'll get something that's helpful. If we're vague and unclear, we're leaving it up to the genius or the model to interpret our request and then generate something that might not be really helpful. Let's look at a few different strategies we can use to improve the output. So let's look at a prompting framework. Now, over the past couple of years, where as the models have evolved, I used to use really structured frameworks, and these are really helpful. We don't have to stick exactly to these, but they can be such a good starting off point to get what we want out of the tools. So let's break down this four-part framework so you can be more comfortable improving your prompt writing strategies. So we'll start out with the goal, like what do you want? And so the kind of like purplish text here is the structure of the framework. The black text is what this might look like in an actual prompt to a generative AI model. I want to recommend a list of summer reading books for my students who will be incoming 10th graders. That's the goal. We're looking to solve this particular problem. We can be clear and very specific with as much detail as possible. Then we go to the structure of the format. What do we want it to look like? In this case, please provide a bulleted list with at least 25 books that include authors, last and first, book title, year of publication, ISBN number, page length, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, and a one-sentence summary of the text. So this is a bulleted list. When I use these models, I like to ask for tables where I might say in column 1 is the author name, in column 2 is the book title, column 3 is the year of publication, so on and so forth. So I get this really structured output that's easy for me to analyze and work with. You can experiment with both of these approaches. Let's move on to the next third element here. Warnings, limitations, or requests. Things we want the model to avoid, include, or be aware of. So we're being really specific here. I like to think of it like constraints and expectations. I want books that are highly rated by a reputable book review outlet that students will like. All books should be published within the past 10 years. I want them to be developmentally appropriate for adolescents. I want their authors to be diverse in terms of gender, race, and ethnicity. I want a mix of fiction and nonfiction, mix of long and short, with an emphasis possibly on shorter books. So think about all the constraints you might want to provide. And one way I like to think of this is oftentimes what we're telling the model not to do can be just as valuable as what we're telling the model to do. And I like to even add layers like include an accurate hyperlink to the book review so I can click through to read what other readers have said about this, or extract 3 relevant quotes from various book review outlets so I can see what other readers are saying about this text. Now, obviously, these are generative models. We have to validate the output, click through, make sure that that is accurate and helpful. But just think about the idea of having really high levels of expectations with really precise directions in our prompt that we're crafting. Let's look at the last element here, which can be referred to as a context dump. Anything else that we could possibly think might be useful for the tool to have that text. A few of my students are avid readers, some are reluctant, some have never read an entire book before. The purpose or point of this summer reading is for students to really enjoy the book. I want the books to be ones that young people will really gravitate to or really like, right? So we're just providing more context along the way. One tip I always like to highlight is that when you're working with generative models, you can hit on your keyboard Shift and Return or Shift and Enter to create a line break. So instead of just typing, and hitting return, that will send the prompt through. So I like to type an element, shift, return, do a line break, write out my next thing that I want to have. Shift, return, that creates a line break, write out my next thing. The other thing that I like to do when I'm providing limitations or requests, things to avoid, things to include, kind of more constraints, I like to number these. So then in the output, I can say, in the output, create a numbered output that explains how you addressed constraint number 1, constraint number 2, and constraint number 3. So that can avoid maybe the tool having some confusion about all the things you're asking it to do. So these are just some strategies along the way that can be helpful. I encourage you to use this prompting framework and then experiment with some modifications on your own, maybe even the ones that I mentioned. So more strategies for improving the output is providing examples. So we're going to look at 2 prompts here, one that does not provide any example and then one that provides an example. And by example, we mean resources. We're giving the tool resources to build off of and go, this is what we want it to look like. So resources or examples or models allow the tool to create output that can be more valuable to us. Let's look at the simple example on the left. I want to teach my students about the engineering and design cycle, and I'd like to use a video of some sort. I came across the best video from IDEO, the one where they design a shopping cart. I want a video like that, but more up to date. Please search YouTube and give me recommendation with links. So like we haven't given a model, we haven't given an example. Look how different this other prompt is. Here is a lesson I designed on the engineering and design cycle, and we provide the lesson, whether it's a PDF or we're linking it to our digital storage, however we get the file there. I think PDFs work well. I like its level of detail and its use of multimedia sources. Here's a draft of a lesson on material science, and we upload that draft. That needs a similar level of detail and media components, and it needs to be NGSS aligned. Propose options for finalizing the lesson. What I also might do is upload the NGSS standards to make sure there's a model to work from. I like this last element of propose options for finalizing the lesson. We're not saying rewrite it for me. We're going, give me some things that I can think about. Give me some ideas I can consider. I even like using language of develop a strategic plan for me to improve this lesson to align to the one that I provided with the detailed example, so I can create one that's NGSS aligned and has a specificity and level of detail as well as multimedia resources. So these can be really helpful strategies along the way. And again, models and examples work well. I was working with math teachers that wanted to build new word problems so they could vary them for their students in their classroom. And one helpful starting off point is provide examples of word problems that you like to use, provide the standards and the skills and abilities that you're addressing. And then we can say, please redesign X number of word problems that match the structure and the approach of the word problems that were provided to make sure they're kind of at the appropriate level for your students to engage with. Another option you have here is to work from existing prompts or existing libraries. So we have two libraries here. One is the AI for Education prompt library, and almost every language model has some sort of like educator library. Here's the AI for Education library. Google also has some ready-to-use AI prompts specifically targeted for teachers. What we're going to do now is do a little live demo of the Google prompts because I like a strategy that we can use in this approach. Let me jump over to those live right now so we can learn more about how to use these prompts and actually learn from them. So here we are on the Google for Education ready to use AI prompts. So they have a whole number of prompts here around different kind of things that teachers typically do in their classroom. What I like here is crafting engaging discussion prompts, right? I want to think more deeply about doing that in my classroom. And again, this link will be provided in the video description below if you'd like to explore this page on your own. If I click on this prompt, what it will do for me is automatically open this in Google's generative AI model. And now I can have this interaction to build my engaging discussion questions. What I really like to do, though, is look at the prompt itself to figure out how I might be able to learn from it. So if I open up this prompt that came directly from their prompting page, now I can read through how this prompt was built. And if you'll notice, it starts up here. It's saying your role. You are an expert academic content creator who has specific training in encouraging discourse and crafting meaningful discussion questions. So right away, we can see that Google is teaching the generative model to go, here's the role you're going to take. Now, here's a really interesting strategy. When you find a prompt that you're like, oh, this is a really good interaction, this is a really well-crafted prompt, we can learn from it. So what I'm going to do next is copy this entire prompt, start a new chat, paste the prompt in. I'm doing shift return to do a line break. And I'm going to say, do not run this prompt. Instead, analyze the prompt and describe the strategies and techniques that are used in the prompt that make it a valuable and quality prompt design. Then create a table as an output that includes a technique used in the prompt, the specific example of that technique, and a description of how that technique can be used in another prompt or instance. So I'm asking the tool to analyze, decode, and break down this prompt. So it's telling me, okay, this prompt uses a role of expertise. It sets specific interactions. It has rules of engagement telling the AI model, here's what you're allowed to do. Don't rush to a solution. Extract information. It's trying to remove hallucinations. It has this iterative refinement, this chain of thought back and forth. So it builds feedback into the experience and it's really making the end user engage with it. And it's looking for quality indicators along the way. It's defining what a high quality interaction would look like. So here we go. It's saying it has a persona. It's telling the tool you're an expert academic content creator. So we might use this in the future to give any other prompt a specific role. It's giving it constraints, step by step flow of the interaction, almost like what the back and forth dialogue will look like. So now we have the ability to learn how to craft really high quality prompts by looking at high quality prompts when we're working with them. So that's another strategy we can use of libraries and learn from those libraries. The other thing we can do is simply have conversations. So at this point with these language models, we can write really thorough, well-crafted, exceptionally precise and clear prompts, or we can simply have a back and forth and keep building off of that back and forth. And let's model that here. So examine the claim that President Truman made the correct decision to use atomic weapons in World War II. And then the generative model goes, okay, here's the claim. Now we're going to examine that claim and look at arguments in favor and arguments against. Because I told you to examine the claim, not support the claim, defend or justify, examine it from all perspectives. Once we get that output, then I can say in this conversational back and forth, restructure that output into a formatted table. Column 1, the argument in short form. Column 2, does the argument support or refute this event? Column 3, give me a detailed explanation of the argument. Column 4, a relevant web resource that connects to that argument or this perspective. So now we're kind of refining and having a back and forth, and you can see this is what it looks like. We have the short form argument, whether it supports or refutes, detailed explanation, and then a link to the web source. Let's go further, conversational back and forth. Last step, use the information that's curated from our chat and our prompt to create a DBQ, which is a document-based question. A DBQ is a strategy that's used in many social studies and history classes where we look at excerpts from primary source documents, pull those excerpts out, use them as an example, and have students engage with smaller elements of larger documents. So make a DBQ for a structured learning experience for ninth graders. For each source linked in the table above, extract one accurate and compelling quote and generate 2 questions that students will deal with connected to that quote. Question 1 is a check for understanding. Question 2 is a check for analysis. Include the link to the web source with each quote provided. Confirm that each quote is accurate. Output as a table. And this is what we get. We have the document, we have the quote, we have the core understanding, and then we have the historical analysis, and then we have a link back to the original source. Now, what I would do is copy that quote, open up the source, do a find on page, make sure it's there, go, hey, is this accurate? Validate those questions. Do I have domain knowledge to be able to validate? Are these accurate and meaningful and reliable questions? But this is really illustrating that kind of back and forth. I don't have to write this thorough prompt up front. I can know where I'm going along the way, but I can look at the output that's generated and go, okay, are we ready for the next step? Can I validate this? Does this look helpful? Am I ready for the next step? And then we can get to helping us build this really high quality document-based question. So another strategy we have to have is understanding how to overcome the bias. Now, if you think back to a previous webinar, we had this example during the, I think it was webinar 2, where we're developing foundational skills. We asked an image generative model, make me an image of an analog clock at 7 p.m. And it cranks out that clock at 10:10 because the data set tells it clocks on the internet look like this. So we're going to generate a clock like that. How can we overcome the bias? We can be so precise and clear and detailed in what we're asking for. And this is a really good illustration of that. And then we'll tie it to other ideas as well. So draw a clock with the exact hand positions where the minute hand is at 90 degrees and it's pointing at the 3, and the hour hand is at 217.5 degrees and it's a quarter of the way in between the 7 and the 8, which it didn't quite do. Close. No other positions are allowed. It needs to be photorealistic and a white-faced wall clock. And then we get exactly what we're looking for, or very close to that. Now, you might be thinking, like, analog clocks are irrelevant. I like this idea because it's a really benign and reasonable way to talk about the idea of bias and see it so clearly. If the data set says clocks are like this, that's how clocks will be generated. We can overcome that bias by having very clear descriptions, expectations, and constraints in our prompts. If we think back to that World War II Truman decision atomic bomb example, we might say, we're looking for outputs that represent multiple perspectives. We want more than just a US Western centric perspective. We want revisionist history and we want global perspective and we want lots of different ideas to think about this, not falling into this trap of the tools are trying to fulfill exactly what we want. And there's some bias embedded in the output. Again, we're increasing our skill and ability to write high quality prompts, have high levels of expectation, have high constraints, and then getting exactly what we want from it. Now, one other thing we can do to overcome bias is use this really helpful tool that was developed by Mike Caulfield. He's the developer of the SIFT prompt, which we mentioned in an earlier webinar. Mike has developed these really helpful follow-up prompts that we can use to push the tool further to overcome the bias. Now, these work really well with AI generated search engines or AI supported search engines, but we can use the thinking behind this in many ways. So imagine if we're using a tool and a generative AI tool, and we're asking it to evaluate Truman's decision, and it does that evaluation. And then we come back and we go, what is the evidence for or against this claim, right? Finding me a link to original sources to validate your thinking. If the original link isn't available, find the closest thing to that original source. Give me the background to this claim and any discourse that I need to understand its significance. So what we're trying to do here is kind of connect to our domain knowledge and make sure the tool is being balanced in the output. We're asking it to almost do this self-check-in and providing evidence, looking for misconceptions, looking for misunderstandings along the way. The link to these follow-up prompts will be provided in the description of the video below. Really helpful page where you can just copy these and then paste them into your text generative interaction. So we've explored a lot of different ways to interact with these tools, developing prompts, writing high quality prompts. What I also want to show is another example of how if we can provide the data set and provide the examples, then we can create really meaningful output. So we're going to go to that live demonstration right now, which is having a conversation, demonstrating high levels of domain knowledge, but also providing examples and providing data to make sure that the output that we get is really high quality. So let's jump to a live demo now. So to demonstrate this idea of having like a back and forth discussion where we can validate the output and we have domain expertise and we can provide models and examples, I'm in an instance of Notebook LM, which is a digital notebook tool that has a language model built right into it. But the value here is that we can upload our own data set. So I just want to demonstrate what this looks like because we're applying all these principles together. In this notebook, this is all about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail. What I've also done is added in here in my sources is not just information about his letter, the letter, a curriculum document, websites about the letter, some YouTube videos about the letter. I've also added tons of information about project-based learning and the Buck Institute's gold standard PBL. What I can do now is chat with my notebook about transforming Dr. King's letter into a project-based learning experience. So what I'm going to do is add in my first interaction. So I won't type this out, I'll just paste it in. I want to transform Dr. King's letter into high quality, quote, gold standard a PBL learning experience. Can we please start by crafting driving questions that align to the Buck Institute for Education's protocol and description of driving questions? Please create 6 with unique approaches that I can evaluate. The only way that this is going to be a valuable experience is if I have domain knowledge in the letter and domain knowledge in PBL. Even simply saying I like to start with crafting driving questions means I have some awareness and understanding of the phases of developing a project-based learning experience. So I'm going to push this through. And now because I provided models and because I've provided resources, all of the output that's going to be generated is grounded in and aligned to the resources I've provided. So now we're going to get 6 driving questions that I can evaluate. I can bring back in my team. I might bring to a department meeting and go, hey, here's 6 ideas. What do we think? Let's critique them. Let's figure out if they're going to work in our classroom setting. So we have Driving question number one, how it aligns to project-based learning. Driving question number two, how it aligns to project-based learning. And you can see all these citations here. This is demonstrating where the ideas came from in our data set off to the left-hand side. So I wanted to demonstrate that as an example of like how powerful it is when we can merge all these ideas together. We have domain knowledge. So as an end user, I've read those letters, I've taught that letter, I'm super comfortable with the content and have domain knowledge around that topic area. And when I understand how to manipulate the tools effectively, write a high quality prompt, be really precise in terms of what I'm asking for. And if we even think back to the previous session of this human-centered approach, I've done the work ahead of time. I've read the content. I've studied project-based learning. I've worked in that domain before. Now I'm going to the tool and going, I want 6 different little question types. I'm going to walk away from the tool, take those questions, think about them, evaluate them, rewrite them on my own, critique them, work with them in my history department, and then come back to the tool and work from there. And that's really aligning to that human-centered approach that we've talked about earlier. Now we have to think about evaluating the output, right? So if we know how to write high quality prompts to generate good output, we need to evaluate that and be aware of 3 really critical ideas: automation bias, decontextualizing information, and verifying. So what do we mean by that? So automation bias refers to people's tendency to accept the outcomes of automated systems without critically examining them. We always have to keep in mind that even though in the instance of me asking it to generate those driving questions, I just simply can't accept that output. I have to validate it, critically examine that, and determine if they're going to fit in my classroom with my students. Decontextualizing information. Instead of encountering words within their original context, such as in a book or a web page where readers can assess authorship and other credibility indicators, AI models often synthesize information from multiple sources into a single response. So if I say, evaluate Truman's decision, it's not the tools are not going to the web, copying one idea, pasting it, putting the source, copying the next idea, pasting it, and putting the source. What we learned from webinar 2 is these tools are built off of massive amounts of data, and they're simply predicting the next word that should be generated in the output or the next token that should be generated with no understanding, no awareness, no thinking really happening at all. Now, as soon as that information is ripped out of its original context, we don't know where it came from. I think what we were able to do in this webinar, though, with that back and forth prompt I demonstrated earlier of evaluate the content, present it in the form of a data table with original links, now extract an original quote with the quote citation from the original link and give me a link back and give me the author. Now we're almost forcing the tool not to decontextualize. We're forcing the tool to give us original context so we can even overcome this challenge of using generative models. And the last idea to think about when we're evaluating output is verifying it. So AI generated content doesn't always involve factual claims. It can be verified. People might use it to help generate poetry, emails, lesson plans, or other creative content. Even though these outputs aren't necessarily informational, they still need to be carefully evaluated. We can't simply stamp on the or shipping our idea and going, well, AI made it, so I'm not responsible. The end user is responsible for all of the content that's generated. We always have to have that perspective. So how can we evaluate, right? We have to have strategies to do this. So let's look at this MVP strategy where we're going to go through meaning, veracity, and perspective. So we think about meaning first. Does this output make sense to me? Is it doing what I asked it to do? Is the style and focus what I needed? So can I evaluate that immediately? Let's go to the next layer, which is veracity. Is this true or real, or did the AI make something up, like a quote, person, or book that doesn't exist? I think we've modeled with some of the prompts where we're demanding that the tool give a link to an original source. We're demanding that the tool explain an idea from that original source, and we can even click through to find it. We're not just accepting summaries. We're looking for original information that we can use to validate the generative text. Now, the last idea here is perspective. Who or what is missing that should be here? How might different people react to this? This is thinking about how can we overcome that bias that may be embedded in the tool and demand that the tools generate multiple perspectives. Give me different angles on this. Let's avoid the kind of one dominant narrative around this concept. And we can use this MVP strategy to really help us think about evaluating the output. I think ultimately, as we're kind of wrapping up this component of the webinar, let's think about the key takeaway here. Because AI outputs can sound confident, even when they're wrong or biased, it's essential to evaluate them critically. A simple framework like the MVP, meaning, veracity, perspective, can help users quickly assess whether an AI response is useful, accurate, and fair. So I really appreciate you watching this part 4 in our webinar series. I look forward to joining you in the next one, which is part 5, where we're going to explore prioritizing people, and we're really going to get into the idea of responsible use and recognizing data privacy when we're using these tools. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next component in this webinar series.